Haley knew her marriage was effectively over the moment she saw the red wine drip from her husband's chin, caught not by a napkin, but by the manicured thumb of another woman. It wasn't just any woman, and it certainly wasn't just any night. It was the 5th anniversary of the day Haley had stood in a vineyard in Napa, promising to love Zachary through sickness and health. She had spent the entire afternoon basting a roast, polishing the good silver, and wrestling her unruly hair into an elegant chignon. She had envisioned a quiet, intimate evening where they might finally talk about something other than Zachary's stressful startup or the leaking roof. Instead, she was standing in the doorway of her own dining room, holding a chilled bottle of vintage Merlot, watching her husband laugh. Sitting on Zachary's lap, bold as brass and twice as shiny, was Jessica. Zachary called her his little sister, a childhood friend whose parents had known his. But sisters don't sit on their brothers' laps when they are 32 years old, and sisters certainly don't do it while wearing the wife's lingerie. Haley felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and clammy. Jessica was draped in Haley's silk robe, the emerald green one with the hand-stitched lace, a piece Haley had bought in Paris on their honeymoon. She had been saving it for tonight now. It was hanging loosely off Jessica's shoulder, exposing a generous amount of pale skin and a lacy black bra that definitely didn't belong to Haley. "Oh, Haley, you are finally done in the kitchen," Jessica chirped, not moving an inch. She spearheaded a piece of the roast beef. Haley had spent 3 hours tenderizing and held it to Zachary's lips. "Open up, Davy. Haley's cooking is a little dry, isn't it? But you need your protein." Zachary opened his mouth and took the bite, his eyes crinkling with that boyish charm Haley used to adore. He swallowed, then looked at Haley, his expression shifting from delight to annoyance in a heartbeat. "About time, babe. Jessica was starving. You know, she gets low blood sugar." The audacity was so thick it practically choked the air in the room. Haley gripped the neck of the wind bottle until her knuckles turned white. "That's my robe, Jessica," Haley said, her voice trembling not with sadness, but with a sudden, icy rage. "And that is my husband. And this is our anniversary dinner." Zachary groaned, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling as if asking for patience. "Here we go. The jealousy again." "Haley, honestly, it's embarrassing." Jessica spilled wine on her dress. "What was she supposed to do? Sit there wet? You have a closet full of clothes. Don't be so stingy." "She could have worn a shirt, Zachary, or her own coat. She didn't need to raid my lingerie drawer." Jessica shrank against Zachary's chest, her lower lip trembling. It was a performance worthy of a daytime Emmy. "I'm sorry, Davy. I didn't know she'd be so mad. I just wanted to be comfortable. I feel so attacked right now." "See what you did," Zachary snapped, his hand soothingly stroking Jessica's bare arm. "She's sensitive, Haley. You know she's going through a hard time with her breakup. Can't you be gracious for once? You're acting like a crazy person." Crazy. That was Zachary's favorite word lately. If Haley asked why he came home at 2 a.m. smelling of cheap perfume, she was crazy. If she asked why $5,000 was missing from their joint account, she was paranoid. For a long time, Haley had believed him. She had tried to be the cool wife, the supportive partner who didn't nag. She had dimmed her own light to let him shine, hiding her family's wealth and connections, because Zachary had too much pride to accept help. She had built this home, this life, around his fragile ego. But the fog was lifting. "I'm not the one acting crazy, Zachary," Haley said, placing the wine bottle on the table with a deliberate thud. "I'm the one watching my husband play house with his mistress in my kitchen while our son is sleeping upstairs." "Mistress, that is disgusting." Zachary shouted, startling them all. He stood up abruptly, nearly dumping Jessica onto the floor. But he didn't push her away, he just steadied her by the waist. "We are practically family. You have a dirty mind, Haley. That's your problem. You're frigid and suspicious, and you project that onto everyone else." Before Haley could respond, a small voice sliced through the tension like a knife. "Daddy?" They all froze, standing at the bottom of the stairs, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, was 5-year-old Asher. His hair was messy from sleep, and his big, innocent eyes were wide with confusion. "Asher, go back to bed," Zachary barked, his face flushing red. Asher didn't move. He walked into the dining room, his gaze fixed on Jessica, who was trying to pull the silk robe closed over her chest. "Daddy," Asher said, his voice clear and curious, "why is that lady sitting on your lap? Are her legs broken?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that screams. "And that's Mommy's sleeping dress," Asher continued, pointing a small finger. "And that's the meat Mommy cooked. Why are you feeding Daddy like a baby? Daddy knows how to use a fork. Mommy says only babies need help eating." Jessica turned a brilliant shade of crimson. She scrambled off the chair, finally looking ashamed. Zachary, however, looked furious, not at himself, but at his son. "Asher, who taught you to speak to adults like that? Did your mother put you up to this?" He took a threatening step toward the boy. Haley moved faster than she ever had in her life. She was between them in a heartbeat, scooping Asher up into her arms and shielding him with her body. "Don't you dare," Haley hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare yell at him for seeing the truth. You're poisoning him against me." Zachary roared, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "Get him out of here. You've ruined the night. Are you happy now? Jessica is crying." "I don't care if Jessica is crying," Haley said, backing away toward the stairs. "I care that she gets out of my house tonight." Zachary laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "This is my house, Haley. I pay the mortgage. If anyone leaves, it's you. If you can't treat our guest with respect, go sleep in the guest room and take the kid with you." Haley looked at the man she had loved for 5 years. She looked at the woman smirking behind her hands, and then she looked down at her son, who was trembling in her arms. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet click of a lock turning. "Fine," Haley said softly. "Enjoy your dinner, Zachary. I hope it was worth it." She carried Asher upstairs, her back straight, her dignity wrapped around her like armor. She didn't cry. Tears were for women who still had hope. Haley had something better than hope. She put Asher back in bed, kissed his forehead, and walked into the master bathroom. She locked the door and pulled out her phone. It buzzed immediately. A message from a private number she had contacted 3 days ago. Just a hunch she had prayed was wrong. It was a photo time, stamped 2 hours ago. It showed Zachary and Jessica in the jewelry store downtown, the expensive one. Zachary was buying a diamond tennis bracelet. Haley looked down at her own wrist, bare except for her smartwatch. She typed a single reply, "Send me everything." The bank statements, the hotel receipts, all of it. Then she opened her banking app and looked at the joint account. Zachary thought he was the provider because Haley let him believe it. He thought the house was his because Haley had put his name on the deed to boost his confidence. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the transfer button. "You want to play the big man, Zachary?" She whispered to the empty room. "Let's see how big you are when the safety net is gone." The next morning, the house didn't smell like apology or regret. It smelled like bacon and expensive perfume, 2 things that currently nauseated Haley. She walked down the stairs dressed not in her usual comfortable yoga pants, but in a structured blazer and dark jeans. She had spent the night in Asher's room, curled up on the trundle bed, listening to her son's soft breathing, while her own heart hammered a war drum in her chest. In the living room, the tableau was almost comical. Jessica was sprawled across the oversized beige sectional, Haley's favorite spot to read, with her left leg propped up on 3 decorative pillows. She was wearing one of Zachary's oversized dress shirts, buttoned just enough to be decent, but unbuttoned enough to be suggestive. Zachary was kneeling beside her, carefully wrapping an ace bandage around an ankle that looked perfectly fine to Haley. "It hurts, Davy," Jessica whimpered, wincing as he touched her skin. "I think I heard something pop when I tripped." Zachary looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw Haley. "Finally awake, Your Majesty. Look at what your negligence caused. Jessica tripped over one of your ridiculous potted plants in the hallway last night." Haley paused at the bottom of the stairs, a cold smile touching her lips. "The plant that has been in that corner for 3 years, the one that doesn't move. Interesting." "Don't start with the attitude," Zachary snapped, standing up and wiping his hands on his trousers. "She's in pain, since you clearly can't be bothered to ask. She sprained her ankle badly. She can't put weight on it." "That's unfortunate," Haley said, her voice flat. "I suppose she should go to urgent care. I'll call an Uber." "She's not going anywhere," Zachary declared, puffed up with self-righteous indignation. "She's staying here where she can be taken care of, and since you're the one who leaves clutter everywhere, you can help." He gestured toward the kitchen. "She needs ice, and make her some of that green smoothie stuff you drink. She needs vitamins to heal. Oh, and bring it here, she can't walk to the table." Haley stared at him. For a moment she saw the man she had married, the ambitious, charming dreamer, and wondered if he had ever existed, or if he had just been a well-tailored suit stuffed with straw. "No," she said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Jessica stopped whimpering. Zachary's jaw actually dropped. "Excuse me." "I said no," Haley repeated, walking calmly past them toward the kitchen to pour herself black coffee. "I am not your maid, Zachary, and I am certainly not hers. If she is injured, take her to a doctor. If she is hungry, she has hands. But if she is staying in my house, she better learn to limp." Zachary followed her into the kitchen, his face flushing a dangerous shade of purple. He hated being defied. He hated it almost as much as he hated being poor, which was why he clung so tightly to the image of being the provider. "You are pushing your luck, Haley," he hissed, cornering her by the espresso machine. "You think you can just walk around here like you own the place. I pay the mortgage. I pay for the car you drive. I pay for the clothes on your back. You contribute nothing but a bad attitude." Haley took a slow sip of her coffee. The bitterness grounded her. "Is that so?" "Yes, that's so." Zachary slammed his hand on the marble countertop. "You've gotten too comfortable spending my money. Maybe you need a reminder of who actually keeps this family afloat. Give me the credit card." The credit card. Haley raised an eyebrow. "The supplementary platinum card, the one I graciously let you use for groceries and your little hobbies, hand it over." Now, he held out his hand, palm up, expecting immediate submission. "If you can't act like a supportive wife, you don't get the perks of being one. Consider your allowance suspended until you learn some respect." There is a specific kind of delusional arrogance found only in men who are financially dependent on the women they are actively disrespecting. Zachary truly believed he was the CEO of the household because he held the plastic, failing to realize he was merely the authorized user of Haley's patience. Snapping that card wasn't a tantrum. It was an administrative correction. "Ladies, If a man ever threatens to cut off your access to resources that you legally guarantee, do not argue. Simply break the connection. You cannot starve a woman who owns the grocery store. Watch how quickly the provider shrinks when he realizes he was actually just the spender. Haley set her mug down. She reached into her purse and pulled out the sleek, heavy metal card. It glinted under the kitchen pendulum lights. Zachary smirked, a cruel, satisfied twist of his lips. That's what I thought. You know, you're nothing without me. Haley looked at the card. It had his name as the primary account holder. Yes, but Zachary had forgotten, or perhaps. In his arrogance, he never truly understood that the account was backed by a guarantee from her father's estate. The credit limit he enjoyed, the low interest rates, the exclusive access. It was all because the bank knew who Haley actually was, not because of Zachary's volatile tech startup. He thought he was taking away her lifeline. In reality, he was cutting his own parachute. You want it back? Haley asked softly. I want you to learn your place, Zachary sneered. Haley didn't hand it to him. Instead, she held the card between her thumb and forefinger. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she bent the metal. It was tough, designed to be indestructible, but her rage was stronger. She bent it back and forth, the metal groaning until snap. She dropped the two useless halves into his open palm. Keep it, she said, her voice eerily calm. I don't need your permission to survive, Zachary, and I certainly don't need your allowance. Zachary stared at the broken pieces of plastic, stunned into silence. You're insane, he whispered. You're going to come crawling back in 2 days when you run out of gas money. Don't hold your breath, Haley replied. She turned on her heel, grabbing her keys. I'm taking Asher to school, and when I get back, if she is still on my sofa wearing your shirt, I'm not calling an Uber. I'm calling the police. She walked out the door, the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood like gunshots. As she got into her car, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from her private bank, the one Zachary didn't know about. Trust fund disbursement, approved balance, $2,500,000. She looked at the house one last time. Zachary was standing in the window, watching her, looking small and petty. He thought he had just disarmed her. He had no idea he had just handed her the weapon she would use to destroy him. When Haley returned from picking Asher up from kindergarten later that afternoon, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from hostile to something far more sinister, calm. She unlocked the front door, bracing herself for another confrontation about the credit card or the groceries. Instead, she was greeted by the sound of furniture being dragged across hardwood floors. Her stomach dropped. It was a specific, heavy scraping sound coming from the second floor. Mommy? Asher looked up at her, clutching his backpack straps, sensing the tension radiating off her like heat from a pavement. Stay here, sweetie, Haley said, her voice tight. Go watch Bluey in the living room. She took the stairs 2 at a time. The noise was coming from the end of the hall, the master suite. Number. It was coming from the room next to it, Asher's room. The door was wide open inside. Zachary was sweating through his dress shirt, dismantling Asher's bed frame. Jessica was sitting on a chair in the corner, miraculously healed enough to supervise, pointing a manicured finger at the closet. Zachary. Haley's voice was barely a whisper, but it stopped him cold. He looked up, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Oh, you're back. Good. You can help move the mattress. It's heavier than it looks. Haley stepped into the room. It had been her masterpiece. She had hand-painted the galaxy on the ceiling for Asher's 4th birthday. She had chosen the room specifically for its southern exposure, so Asher would wake up with the sun. Now, huge cardboard boxes were piled everywhere, filled haphazardly with Asher's toys, his clothes, his comfort. "What are you doing?" Haley asked, walking over to a box where Asher's favorite stuffed dinosaur was crushed under a pile of heavy textbooks. She pulled the toy out, dusting it off with shaking hands. "We're switching rooms," Zachary said casually, as if talking about the weather. "Jessica's ankle is throbbing. This room gets the most light, and it has the en-suite bathroom. She needs the accessibility." "You are evicting your son?" Haley asked, her voice raising an octave. "For a sprained ankle?" "It's temporary," Jessica chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "I just feel so claustrophobic in the guest room, Haley. It's so dark. You know how sensitive I am to my environment. Besides, Asher is just a kid. He doesn't care where he sleeps as long as he has his toys." "He is 5 years old," Haley snapped, turning on her. "This is his sanctuary. This is where he feels safe." "Stop being so dramatic," Zachary groaned, lifting the mattress. "We put his stuff in the study downstairs. It's fine, it's practically the same size." The study, the small, drafty room on the north side of the house next to the noisy HVAC unit. The room they used for storage. Just then, Asher appeared in the doorway. He had disobeyed instructions. He stood there, small and frozen, watching his father dismantle his world. He looked at the boxes. He looked at the "Daddy," Asher's voice wobbled. "Where is my bed going?" Zachary didn't even stop working. "Downstairs, bud. Jessica needs this room for a while. You're going to be on an adventure in the study, like camping." "I don't want to camp," Asher whispered, tears instantly welling up in his big brown eyes. "I want my stars," he pointed to the ceiling. "I want my room." "Big boys don't cry over rooms, Asher," Zachary said sharply. He dropped the mattress with a loud thud that made Asher jump. "Stop blubbering. You're acting like a girl. Toughen up. This is the line in the sand. You can cheat on me, you can wear my robe, you can even eat my roast beef. But the moment you displace my child to make a mistress comfortable, you have declared war." Zachary made the fatal error of confusing a wife's silence for weakness. He didn't realize that while a wife might try to save the marriage, a mother will burn the entire village to keep her child warm. Evicting a 5-year-old for a sprained ankle isn't just bad parenting. It's a resignation letter from the family. And Haley accepted it immediately. That was it. The invisible thread that had been holding Haley's restraint together finally snapped. It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't the disrespect. It wasn't even the money. It was the look on Asher's face. The realization that his father would trade his comfort for a mistress's whim without a second thought. "Get out," Haley said. Zachary paused. "What?" I said. "Stop moving the furniture and get out." "Haley, we are doing this." Zachary stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "I make the decisions in this house. If you don't like it—" "I don't like it," Haley interrupted, her voice deadly calm. She walked over to Asher, picked him up, and held him tight against her hip. He buried his face in her neck, sobbing quietly. "It's okay, baby. We're not staying." Zachary scoffed. "Oh, here we go again. Where exactly are you going to go? A hotel? You don't have a credit card, remember? I cut you off." "I remember," Haley said. She looked at Jessica, who was smirking, already envisioning herself in the master of the house role. Then she looked at Zachary, really looked at him, and realized she felt nothing but pity. "We'll be gone in an hour," Haley said. She didn't argue, she didn't fight for the room. She walked Asher down the hall to the guest bathroom, washed his face, and sat him down with his iPad. "Pack your backpack with only your absolute favorite things. Asher, we're going on a real adventure." a better one. While Zachary and Jessica laughed loudly in the hallway, celebrating their victory, the sound of their mirth echoing like nails on a chalkboard. Haley went into the master bedroom. She didn't pack clothes for herself. She took only documents, birth certificates, passports, the hidden file of bank records she had compiled months ago just in case, and a small velvet box containing her grandmother's ring. She threw them into a tote bag. Then she walked out on the balcony. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn she had manicured herself. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over a contact named the General. She hadn't called this number in 6 years, not since she chose Zachary over her inheritance, not since her father told her, "That man is a hollow shell, Haley. He will drain you dry." Checkmate, she hit the call button. It rang once, twice. Haley. The voice on the other end was gruff, old, and powerful. It was the voice of a man who owned skylines. Haley closed her eyes, letting a single tear slip out, not for Zachary, but for the time she had wasted. "Daddy," she said, her voice breaking just enough to be real, but strong enough to be heard. "You were right about everything." There was a pause on the line, then the sound of a chair scraping back, movement, action. "Where are you?" "I am at the house," she said. "But I am leaving. Me and Asher, we're leaving everything." "I'll have the jet ready in 2 hours," her father said. His voice wasn't angry. It was a fortress opening its gates. "Come home, Haley. Come take your rightful place." "I am coming home," she whispered. She hung up the phone and looked back at the house. Zachary was shouting something about ordering pizza. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had just ceased to exist. Haley picked up her bag. She didn't look back. 20 minutes later, Haley stood in the foyer. She wore her trench coat belted tightly at the waist. Asher's small hand gripped firmly in hers. They had 2 bags. Asher's backpack, bursting with Legos and his teddy bear, and her tote bag containing the documents that would legally incinerate Zachary's life. She walked to the console table by the front door. On the silver tray where they usually kept the mail, she placed 2 items. First, the key fob to the massive SUV in the driveway. Zachary had leased it 6 months ago to keep up appearances at the club, constantly reminding Haley how generous he was for letting her drive it. Second, her wedding ring. It was a modest diamond, one she had gushed over 5 years ago because it's the love that matters, not the size. Looking at it now, it just looked like a pebble, dull, cheap. Leaving so soon. Zachary was at the top of the stairs, leaning over the banister with a smug grin. Jessica was behind him, peeking out like a shy rodent, wearing a fresh application of lipstick. "You didn't even say goodbye," Zachary taunted. "And where are you going, to your mother's trailer? Or did you find a motel that takes food stamps?" Haley didn't look up. She didn't shout. She felt a strange, cold calm settling over her like the surface of a frozen lake. "Goodbye, Zachary," she said simply. She opened the heavy oak front door. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Zachary's footsteps thudded down the stairs. The loss of control was making him itch. He needed her to cry. He needed her to beg. "You can't just walk out like this. You're taking my son." "I'm taking my son," Haley corrected, stepping onto the porch. "And if you want to see him again, you can speak to my lawyer." "Lawyer," Zachary laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He pushed past Jessica and followed Haley out onto the driveway. "With what money? You can't afford a lawyer, Haley. You can't even afford a cab. Look at you, walking down the driveway like a hobo." Haley stopped. She squeezed Asher's hand reassuringly as the boy looked up, wide-eyed, at his shouting father. "It's okay, Asher," she whispered. "Look, our ride is here," Zachary snorted. "Ride? What did you call an Uber pool?" At that moment, the low, powerful hum of an engine purred down the quiet suburban street. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't a rideshare. Rounding the corner was a convoy of two obsidian, black Cadillac Escalades. Their windows tinted so dark they looked like voids. They moved with the aggressive grace of predators. Zachary stopped laughing. He frowned, confused. "Who is that? Is that the police?" The lead car pulled up smoothly to the curb right in front of Haley. The back door didn't just open. A driver in a sharp black suit emerged from the front in seconds, moving with military precision. He wasn't a chauffeur. He was a bodyguard. Haley recognized him immediately. "Arthur," she breathed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. The large man, graying at the temples, but built like a tank, bowed his head slightly. "Miss Haley, it's been too long. The general sent us." Zachary stood frozen on the lawn, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the cars, then at the man who looked like he could snap a neck with 2 fingers, and then at his wife. "Haley," Zachary's voice was high and thin. "Who is this? What's going on?" Arthur ignored Zachary completely. He opened the rear door of the first SUV. The interior was cream leather, lit by soft ambient lighting that looked warmer than Zachary's entire house. "For the young master," Arthur said softly, gesturing for Asher to climb in. "Wow," Asher gasped, his fear momentarily forgotten. "It looks like a spaceship." Haley helped Asher inside, then turned back to Zachary one last time. He looked small now, insignificant. Whatever power he thought he held over her, financial, emotional, physical, had evaporated the moment Arthur stepped onto the pavement. "Haley," Zachary took a step forward, his confusion morphing into panic. "You get back here! You can't just get into a strange car with my son. I'll call the cops." Arthur turned. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even frown. He just looked at Zachary with eyes as cold and hard as flint. He unbuttoned his suit jacket just enough to reveal the handle of a concealed firearm and a badge clipped to his belt. "I wouldn't recommend that, sir," Arthur rumbled. "Miss Haley is under the protection of the Sterling family now. I suggest you go back inside, Sterling." The name hit Zachary like a physical blow. He staggered back a step. Everyone knew the Sterling name, not locally, globally. Real estate, shipping, tech infrastructure, the kind of money that didn't just buy houses, it bought laws, Sterling. Zachary whispered, looking at Haley, "Since when do you know the Sterlings?" The most elegant revenge is rarely a scream. It is a surname. Zachary spent 5 years thinking he was the main character in a drama about a successful man and his mousy wife, only to realize in this exact second that he was merely the comic relief in a biopic about a dynasty. The shift in power here is absolute. He thought he was punching down, only to look up and realize he was standing in the shadow of a skyscraper she owned. Never mistake a woman's modesty for a lack of ammunition. Sometimes, we just don't feel like wasting the good bullets on a target this small. Haley paused with her hand on the car door. She looked at the man who had treated her like a burden for 5 years, the man who thought she was lucky to be allowed to clean his dishes. "I don't just know them, Zachary," she said, her voice crystal clear in the evening air. "I am one." She got into the car. "Wait, Haley, babe." Zachary ran toward the vehicle, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. "We can talk about this. Jessica is leaving, Haley." Arthur slammed the door shut, sealing Haley and Asher inside the quiet, luxurious sanctuary. As the car pulled away, Haley didn't look back. She didn't watch Zachary running down the driveway in his socks, looking ridiculous and desperate. She didn't watch Jessica standing on the porch, her mouth hanging open. She looked forward, She picked up the satellite phone that was waiting on the center console. It was already dialing. "We have them, sir," Arthur said from the front seat. "Etta to the airfield is 20 minutes. "Good," her father's voice came through the speaker, strong and steady. "And the accounts?" Haley picked up the phone. "Freeze them, Daddy. Freeze everything. The personal accounts, the business lines of credit, the mortgage, everything that has my name attached to it or my guarantee." "Consider it done," the general said. "By the time he walks back into the house, his cards will be declined." Haley hung up and pulled Asher into her lap. He was already exploring the buttons on the armrest, marveling at the heated seats. "Mommy," Asher asked, "are we going to be poor now?" Haley kissed the top of his head, inhaling the scent of his shampoo. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. "No, baby," she whispered. "We were poor before now. Now we're going to be untouchable." Zachary stood in the driveway for a full minute after the taillights of the Escalades disappeared. Around the corner, the silence of the suburbs felt different now, less peaceful, more like a vacuum. "Zachary," Jessica's voice shrilled from the porch. She was hopping on one foot, shivering in the evening chill. "My foot is killing me, and it's freezing. Are you coming inside or what?" Zachary spun around, his face a mask of baffled rage. "Did you hear what that guy said, Sterling?" Jessica rolled her eyes. "Who cares? It's probably some sugar daddy she found online. God, she moves fast. I told you she was manipulative." "No," Zachary muttered, walking back toward the house. His mind was racing, trying to connect dots that refused to form a picture. Haley, who wore Target t-shirts and clipped coupons for laundry detergent. Haley, who asked permission to buy a new blender, a Sterling. That's impossible. Her dad was a grumpy old guy who ran a hardware store or something. But as he walked back into the foyer, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. He remembered the supplementary card, her credit, not his. Just order the pizza," Zachary snapped, shutting the heavy door and locking it, as if that could keep the reality of what just happened outside. "I'm going to my office to figure this out with the bank. She probably stole the card and maxed it out on a limo service to scare me." "Fine," Jessica huffed, limping to the living room couch. "But I want extra pepperoni and cinnamon sticks." Zachary went into his study, the small, cramped room he had tried to force his son into, and sat at his desk. He woke up his computer. First, he'd check the joint account. Then he'd report the car stolen. Then he'd call his mother and tell her Haley had finally snapped. He logged into the bank portal. Access denied. Zachary frowned. He typed his password again. Account locked. "Please contact administrator." "What the hell?" he whispered. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He tried his business account, the one for his consulting firm that hadn't actually landed a client in 6 months, but was kept afloat by transfers from their joint savings. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. Guarantor withdrawal. Guarantor, Zachary said aloud. He clicked on the notification. Notice, the primary guarantor Sterling Trust, LLC has exercised the immediate revocation clause on all lines of credit associated with Zachary Miller. All assets secured by the guarantor are subject to immediate repossession. Zachary stared at the screen. The guarantor wasn't the bank. It wasn't an insurance company. It was Sterling Trust. For 5 years, he thought he was a financial genius. He thought he had negotiated the low interest rate on the mortgage, the insane limit on the business credit line, the lease on the luxury SUV. He thought the bank manager just liked him. He felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't him. It had never been him. Ding. Dong, the doorbell rang. "Zachary, food's here," Jessica yelled from the other room. "My wallet is upstairs." Zachary stumbled out of the office. He felt dizzy. He walked to the front door and opened it. A teenage delivery boy stood there with 2 large boxes. "That'll be $42.50, the kid said, popping his gum. Zachary patted his pocket for his wallet. He pulled out his own credit card, his personal one, the one he used for emergencies, and gifts for Jessica. He handed it over with a trembling hand. The kid swiped it on his mobile reader. A harsh beep. "Declined, bro," the kid said. "Try it again," Zachary said, his voice cracking. "It is a platinum card." "Machine says, pickup card," the kid said, looking at the screen. "That usually means it is reported stolen or canceled." Here, Zachary frantically pulled out another card, the debit card for the account he used to pay the utilities. Beep, declined. "Look, man," the kid sighed, stepping back. "I got other deliveries. You got cash." Zachary didn't carry cash. He said cash was for poor people. "I know," Zachary stammered. "I don't. Just, sorry." The kid turned around, taking the pizza with him. "Wait!" Jessica shouted from the couch. "Zachary, pay him! I am starving!" "I can't!" Zachary roared, slamming the door so hard the glass panes rattled. He turned to face Jessica, his face pale and sweaty. "The cards aren't working, none of them." "What do you mean?" Jessica's face twisted in disgust. "You mean you're broke." Zachary looked around the house. The house focused on a mortgage he suddenly realized he couldn't pay, the lights powered by electricity he couldn't afford, and the woman on his couch who was looking at him not with love, but with the calculation of a rat realizing the ship was sinking. 30,000 feet in the air, the atmosphere was very different. Asher was asleep, sprawled out on a reclining leather seat that was wider than his twin bed back home, covered in a cashmere blanket with the sterling crest embroidered in silver thread. He was clutching a new toy, a high-end model of the space shuttle that Arthur had just happened to have in the car. Haley sat across the aisle, sipping a glass of sparkling water. She held a secure phone to her ear. "It's done, Miss Sterling," a sharp, crisp voice said. It was Marcus, the family's chief legal counsel. He had known Haley since she was in braces. "The temporary restraining order has been filed electronically. The divorce petition will be on his doorstep by 8 a.m. tomorrow. We've also frozen the assets." "All of them?" Haley asked. "Down to his gym membership." Marcus confirmed with a hint of professional satisfaction. "We also flagged the SUV as stolen property since the lease was technically in the trust's name. The repo team is already en route. They should arrive shortly." Haley looked out the window at the dark clouds below. "He really had no idea, Marcus. He thought I was lucky he married me." Narcissists rarely look past their own reflection. "Haley," Marcus said gently, "do you want us to arrange a settlement? A buyout to make him go away quietly?" Haley thought about Jessica sitting on her sofa. She thought about Asher's dismantled room. She thought about 5 years of being told she was bad with money by a man spending her inheritance. "No," Haley said. Her voice was cold steel. "No settlements, no buyouts. I want a forensic accounting of every penny he spent from the joint. If he bought so much as a pack of gum for that woman with my money, I want it back." "Understood," Marcus said. "We're going for blood." "Welcome back to the family, Haley. It is good to be back." She hung up just as the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Miss Sterling, we are beginning our descent into Martha's Vineyard. The general is waiting on the tarmac." Haley looked at Asher, sleeping peacefully. The nightmare was over. The reckoning had just begun. Back at the house, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then the house went pitch black. "Zachary!" Jessica screamed in the dark. Zachary stood in the middle of the foyer, invisible and powerless. He pulled out his phone to use the flashlight, but he had no signal. Service suspended. He was alone in the dark, and for the first time in his life, there was no one left to blame but himself. The house remained plunged in darkness, save for the harsh, blinding beam of Jessica's phone flashlight, which she was currently shining directly into Zachary's eyes. "Stop that." Zachary shielded his face, stumbling over an ottoman. "I am telling you, it's a glitch. The bank system is down, maybe a cyber attack. I pay the electric bill on autopay." "Autopay with what?" Jessica's voice was venomous. "With the cards that just got declined for a pepperoni pizza." "It's a mistake," Zachary yelled, his voice echoing in the silent house. "Haley must be. She must have hacked my accounts. She's vindictive. She's trying to embarrass me. Hacked you." Jessica scoffed. "Zachary, she doesn't even know how to reset the Wi-Fi router. You told me she was technologically illiterate." Before Zachary could concoct another lie, the front room was suddenly illuminated, not by the return of power, but by the sweeping amber strobes of heavy machinery coming up the driveway. Zachary rushed to the window. Two massive tow trucks were backing in, their diesel engines rumbling like angry beasts. Finally, Zachary let out a breath, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "It's the utility company. They're here to fix the line." He threw open the front door and jogged out onto the porch. "Hey, over here! The whole house is out." A large man in a reflective vest climbed out of the lead truck. He didn't look like an electrician. He held a clipboard and a heavy set of keys. He walked right past Zachary toward the gleaming black SUV. "Hey!" Zachary ran down the steps. "What are you doing near my car?" The man didn't stop. He checked the VIN number on the dashboard through the windshield. "Repo order," he grunted, signaling his partner in the second truck. "Vehicle reported as misappropriated property of Sterling Trust." "Repo misappropriated." Zachary sputtered, grabbing the man's arm. "That's a lease in my name." The man shook Zachary off with effortless indifference. "Paperwork says otherwise, pal. It says the lease guarantor revoked privileges. And since you reported it stolen earlier to dispatch when your wife took it," he chuckled darkly. "Well, we got here fast. That was, I didn't mean." "Step back, sir," the man said, his tone dropping an octave. "Unless you want to interfere with a repo order. That's a felony." Zachary froze. He watched, helpless, as the hook was attached to the undercarriage of the SUV he had loved more than his wife. The intricate alloy wheels he bragged about scraped violently against the asphalt as it was dragged onto the flatbed. From the porch, Jessica watched the entire scene. The strobe lights painted her face in alternating flashes of yellow and shadow. She wasn't helping. She wasn't crying. She was tapping on her phone. "Uber," she said loudly, as Zachary walked back up the steps, defeated. "Pick up in 10 minutes." Zachary looked at her, his shoulders slumped. "Jess, where are you going?" "My sister's," she said, not looking up from the screen. "And don't bother coming over. I don't date guys who get their cars repossessed." "But I left her for you," Zachary whispered. The reality of his isolation was beginning to crush him. Jessica looked at him then, really looked at him, and sneered. "You left her because you thought you could do better. Turns out she was the one holding the checkbook. You're just a manager at a mid-tier firm with a mountain of debt, aren't you?" She stepped back inside, grabbing her purse. She didn't even grab her shoes. She just limped out in her socks, preferring the cold pavement to another second in his sinking ship. Zachary stood alone on the dark porch. The tow trucks drove away with his pride. The Uber arrived for his mistress. And then silence. 400 miles away, the scene couldn't have been more different. The private jet touched down on the tarmac at Martha's Vineyard with a smoothness that defied gravity. As the engines wind down, the cabin door opened to the smell of salt air and pine. A black town car was waiting right at the bottom of the stairs, flanked by two men in suits. But standing directly in front of the car, leaning on a polished ebony cane with a silver lion's head handle, was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and posture that would shame a Marine. He wore a heavy wool coat over a tuxedo, as if he had left a gala to come meet them. Haley descended the stairs, carrying a sleepy Asher. When her feet touched the ground, the man stepped forward. He didn't smile, the general rarely smiled, but his eyes, usually hard and discerning, softened at the edges. "Haley," he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and familiar. "Hello, Dad," Haley said. She felt 5 years of tension leaving her body. The general looked at the sleeping boy in her arms. "And this represents 5 years of missed birthdays." "This is Asher," Haley said softly. "Asher Nardo, after your father." The old man's breath hitched slightly. He reached out a gloved hand and gently, almost reverently, touched Asher's messy hair. "He has the sterling brow. He has your stubbornness too," Haley added with a tired smile. "Good, he'll need it." The general straightened up and looked at his daughter. "You look tired, Haley, and your coat is insufficient." He unbuttoned his own heavy wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of expensive tobacco and cedar. It weighed a ton, but it felt like armor. "The lawyers have already briefed me," her father said, as he ushered them toward the warm car. "We will discuss strategy in the morning. Tonight you eat, you rest. Mrs. Higgins has made that roast chicken you used to steal from the kitchen." Haley laughed, a sound that felt foreign to her own ears. "You kept Mrs. Higgins?" "I keep what is valuable," the general said simply, opening the car door for her. He paused, looking her in the eye. "I made a mistake letting you go 5 years ago. I should have fought harder." "No," Haley said, climbing in. "I had to learn. I had to see it for myself." "And now I see," Haley said, settling into the leather seat as Asher stirred in her lap. "And I am ready to take back what is mine." The general nodded, satisfied. He got in beside her, and the car began to move toward the massive estate on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. "He called you a few minutes ago," her father noted casually, pouring a drink from a crystal decanter built into the console. "Zachary," to the main switchboard at the office. Haley stiffened. What did he say? He was incoherent. Something about a power outage and a misunderstanding. The general took a sip of his scotch. "What did you tell him?" "I didn't speak to him," the old man said, dismissing the concept as ridiculous. "I had my assistant tell him that Mr. Sterling does not accept collect calls from unemployed individuals." Haley looked out the window at the passing coastline illuminated by the moon. "He is unemployed?" Haley asked. "As of 6 minutes ago," the general said, "I sit on the board of the holding company that owns his consulting firm." It was a rigorous performance review. Haley leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. "Checkmate," she whispered. Sunlight didn't just enter the master suite of the Sterling estate. It commanded the room. Haley woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud. The heavy velvet drapes pulled back to reveal a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the cliffs below. For a moment, she panicked, her hand grasping for a phone to check if she had missed the alarm to make Zachary's coffee. Then, the silence registered. No demands, no criticism, no heavy footsteps. She sat up, wrapping a silk robe around her shoulders. The room was exactly as she had left it 5 years ago. The vintage vanity, the first editions of Jane Austen on the shelf. The framed photo of her mother. It was a time capsule of the girl she used to be before she tried to be normal. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. "Enter," she said, her voice finding its old, confident cadence. "Mrs. Higgins?" A woman who had been ancient when Haley was a child and seemed immortal now, bustled in with a silver tray. "Lemon tea with honey, Miss Haley," Mrs. Higgins said, setting it down. "And Master Asher is already downstairs. He's currently helping cook with the blueberry pancakes. I believe he has appointed himself the official taste tester." Haley smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. "Is he okay? He's not asking for his father?" Mrs. Higgins paused, her expression folding into a kind of stern pity. "He asked if the shouting man was coming when we told him no. He asked for seconds on bacon. Children are resilient, dear, especially when they feel safe." Haley sipped the tea. It was perfect. "I have a meeting with my father." "In the library," Mrs. Higgins confirmed. "Mr. Marcus arrived 20 minutes ago. They're reviewing documents." The library was a cavernous room of mahogany and leather, smelling of old paper and expensive cigars. The general sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged in the Oval Office. Marcus, the family attorney, stood by a whiteboard covered in charts. "Good morning," Haley said, closing the heavy doors behind her. "Sit," the general said, gesturing to a wingback chair. There were no pleasantries. "We have the preliminary forensic accounting from your joint accounts." Marcus tapped a tablet, casting a spreadsheet onto a large screen on the wall. "It's worse than we thought, Haley." Haley leaned forward, squinting at the red numbers. "I knew he was spending a lot, the dinners, the clothes." "That's the tip of the iceberg," Marcus said grimly. "Zachary wasn't just spending. He was siphoning. Siphoning. Look here." Marcus pointed to a recurring transfer of $4,500 a month, labeled consulting retainer to a shell company in Delaware called D. Fajay Ventures. Eid Fajay. Haley furrowed her brow. "Zachary and Jessica." "Precisely," the general rumbled, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "He wasn't just cheating on you physically. He was funding a startup for his mistress, using your inheritance as the seed capital. They bought a condo in the city 6 months ago, in her name, paid for by you." Haley felt the bile rise in her throat. She stared at the numbers. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, systematic, calculated theft. "He told me we couldn't afford swim lessons for Asher," she whispered. "He told me I was spending too much on groceries." Classic gaslighting, Marcus noted efficiently. "But here is the good news. Since the funds came from the guarantor account, Sterling Trust, we have grounds for criminal charges. Embezzlement, fraud." The general leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "The question, Haley, is how much pain you want to inflict. We can crush him in civil court and leave him destitute. Or we can hand this file to the district attorney and put him in a cell." Haley looked at the screen. She thought of Zachary's smug face when he told her she was lucky he married her. She thought of the cold house. "He wanted to take Asher," she said softly. "He threatened me. Then we take his freedom," the general said. "No," Haley said, standing up. The general and Marcus looked at her, surprised. "Prison is too easy," Haley said, walking to the window. "He'll play the victim. He'll tell everyone the big bad Sterlings framed him. I want him to suffer the way he made me suffer. I want him to feel small." She turned back to them, her eyes blazing. "Bankrupt him, evict him. Let him struggle to buy a cup of coffee. Let him watch from the gutter as I build a life he can never touch. And regarding the custody, yes, Marcus asked. Pen hover, ready. Full sole custody, Haley said. Supervised visits only, and he pays child support. The general raised an eyebrow. He has no money. I don't care, Haley said. It's the principal. He needs to know he owes us. At that exact moment, Zachary was waking up to a different kind of reality check. He was freezing. The house was 58 degrees. He had slept in his suit because he couldn't find clean pajamas in the dark. His mouth tasted like stale pizza and regret. He fumbled for his phone. 13% battery left. He had 3 voicemails. First was from Jessica. Don't call me again, my sister says you're toxic and gross. Second was from the landlord of the office space. Mr. Miller, your keycard access has been revoked due to non-payment of the quarterly lease. Please vacate the premises by noon. Third was from his boss, Mr. Henderson. Zachary sat up, rubbing his face. Henderson would understand. Henderson loved him. They golfed together. He dialed the number. Hello. Henderson's voice was clipped. Jim, it's Zachary, he croaked comfortably. Listen, I'm having a hell of a morning. Power outage, some banking glitch. I might be a little late coming in. There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end. Zachary, Henderson said slowly. You haven't checked your email. No, my internet is down. Why, Zachary? Turn on the news, son, or check a stock ticker. What are you talking about? Sterling Global just acquired our parent company, Miller. Hostile takeover happened at opening bell this morning. Zachary's blood ran cold. Sterling. The memo came down from the new board of directors 10 minutes ago, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Immediate restructuring. They're closing the regional branch, specifically your division. My division. You are fired. Zachary, effective immediately. And Zachary, the severance package. There isn't one. They found irregularities in your expense reports. What? That is insane. Expenses were approved. Argue it with their lawyers, Henderson said. I can't talk to you. I have a pension to protect. Goodbye. Click. Zachary stared at the phone as the screen signaled low battery. He stood up, intending to pace, to scream, to throw something. But as he stood, he saw something taped to the outside of the living room window. He walked over. A bright orange sticker was slapped onto the glass. Notice of foreclosure pursuant to the immediate acceleration clause of the mortgage deed. Property to be vacated within 72 hours. Zachary pressed his hand against the cold glass. He looked at his reflection. He looked tired. He looked old. And for the first time in 5 years, he realized he wasn't the main character of this story. He was just the villain who had been written out of the script. His phone died. The screen went black. Zachary sank to the floor in his cold, empty living room, and finally, he began to cry. Not for Haley. Haley stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room. Gone were the khaki capris and the sensible cardigans Zachary insisted she wear to fit in with the other moms. She wore a structured white blazer that cost more than Zachary's car, tailored trousers and heels that clicked with authority against the hardwood floor. She pulled her hair back into a sleek, severe bun. She applied a shade of crimson lipstick that she hadn't worn since her days interning at the gallery in Paris. You look dangerous, Marcus said from the doorway. He was holding a tablet. In a good way. I feel dangerous, Haley replied, turning to face him. Is the car ready? Waiting, and Zachary? He's mobile, Marcus said, checking a notification. Since his phone died, we lost GPS tracking, but our private investigator picked him up visually. He's walking. Walking, Haley raised an eyebrow. To the bank, the erratic behavior of a desperate man. Haley picked up her handbag, a vintage Chanel she had retrieved from storage. Good, let him run into the walls we built. It's time for phase 2. Zachary Miller was sweating despite the crisp autumn air. He had walked 3 miles to the downtown branch of his bank because he didn't have fare for the bus, and his Uber app was linked to a dead card. He burst through the revolving doors of First National out of breath. His suit rumpled from sleeping in it. He marched straight to the teller line, ignoring the velvet rope. "I need to speak to the branch manager," Zachary announced loudly. "Now." The teller, a young woman named Chloe, who had processed his deposits for years, looked at him with wide eyes. She didn't smile. She hit a silent button under the counter. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Please step back." "Don't tell me to step back, Chloe. I've possessed a platinum account here for 5 years. I want to know why my cards are declined and why my house is being seized." "Sir," a deep voice boomed from the glass office to the right. Mr. Henderson, no relation to Zachary's boss, stepped out. He was the bank manager who used to offer Zachary espresso and cigars. Today, he looked at Zachary like he was a stain on the carpet. "My office now," the manager said. Zachary smirked. Finally, some respect. He straightened his tie and followed the manager into the office, flopping into the guest chair. "Look, Bill," Zachary started, leaning forward. "There's been a massive misunderstanding. My wife, she's having a breakdown. She's frozen assets she has no right to touch. I need an emergency bridge loan. 50,000 should do it until I sort this out." Bill Henderson sat behind his desk and folded his hands. He didn't offer espresso. "Mr. Miller," Bill said icily, "we received the subpoena from the district attorney this morning." Zachary blinked. "From who?" "The DA, regarding the fraud investigation into DFJ Ventures." Bill slid a piece of paper across the desk, and this is a notification from the bank's risk management department. "We are closing your accounts, effective immediately." "You can't do that," Zachary shouted, standing up. "I'll sue you. I'll go to another bank." "You can try," Bill said calmly. "But you've been blacklisted, Zachary. The Know Your Customer alert has gone out to every major financial institution in the state. No one is going to open an account for a man under investigation for embezzling funds from a trust as powerful as Sterling." Zachary felt the room spin. It wasn't embezzlement. It was marital assets. I was investing, using a forged signature of the guarantor. Bill raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Sterling sent over the handwriting analysis an hour ago." Zachary froze. He remembered signing the papers for the business loan late one night. He had practiced Haley's signature for an hour. He thought he was being clever. "Get out, Zachary," Bill said, pointing to the door, "before I call security." Zachary stumbled out of the office. The lobby was silent. Everyone was staring, customers, tellers, the security guard. The shame burned his skin like acid. He pushed through the revolving doors, stumbling onto the sidewalk. Zachary Miller, a short, stout man in a windbreaker, stepped in front of him. "What now?" Zachary snapped, rubbing his temples. The man shoved a thick envelope into Zachary's chest. "You've been served," Zachary stared at the man. "What is this?" "Divorce papers, restraining order, and a summons for grand larceny." The man tipped an imaginary hat. "Have a nice day." Zachary held the packet of papers. They were heavy. He looked around. People were walking by, eating sandwiches, talking on phones, living their lives. He sat on the concrete steps of the bank. He ripped open the envelope. The first page wasn't legal jargon. It was a letter on heavy cream-colored stationery with the Sterling crest. "Zachary, you always said I was useless without you. You said I couldn't manage a checkbook. You were right about one thing. I didn't care about money because I always had it. You, however, never had it. You just borrowed the illusion of it." I am taking the illusion back. Enjoy the walk home. Haley Zachary crumbled the letter in his fist. A surge of pure, narcissistic rage overtook the fear. She was mocking him, Haley, the mouse. Haley, the doormat. She thinks she can do this to me, he muttered, his eyes darting around wildly. To me. He stood up. He had no money, no car, and no home to go back to. But he had his ego, and his ego told him that this was all a test, a bluff. If he could just get to her, he could talk his way out of it. He could charm her or scare her. He looked at the skyline, the Sterling Tower, the headquarters of the family empire, dominated the view, a sleek needle of glass and steel piercing the clouds. She is there, he whispered. She has to be. He started walking. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. With his wild eyes, crumpled suit, and desperate pace, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had lost everything, marching toward his own destruction. In the penthouse office of the Sterling Tower, Haley watched the city below. He is heading this way, Marcus said, putting down his phone. Security at the front desk has been alerted. Do you want them to stop him at the door? Haley turned from the window. The sunlight caught the diamond studs in her ears, the ones her mother gave her, which Zachary had tried to make her sell 2 years ago for the business. No, Haley said coldly. Let him in. Let him come all the way up, Haley, the general warned from his armchair. He is unstable. I know, Haley said, but he needs to see me here. He needs to see that I am not in his kitchen anymore. He needs to see the view from the top, so he understands exactly how far he has fallen. She sat behind the massive glass desk. Send him up, she commanded. I am ready to close the deal. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Sterling Tower took exactly 42 seconds. For Zachary, it felt like a lifetime suspended in a vacuum. He watched the floor numbers tick upward, catching his reflection in the polished brass doors. His tie was crooked, his hair windblown, and a sheen of sweat slicked his forehead. He tried to smooth his suit to summon the manager Zachary persona, the guy who commanded respect, the guy who knew wine pairings. But the man in the reflection looked desperate. Ding. The doors slid open. He expected a receptionist to block him. He expected security guards to tackle him. Instead, the lobby was empty, a vast expanse of white marble and floor. To ceiling glass, a single set of double doors at the end of the hall stood open. Zachary walked toward them. His footsteps, usually confident and heavy, were swallowed by the plush carpet. He felt small. He stepped into the office. It was corner-facing, floating above the city like a god's observatory. Haley sat behind a desk that looked like a slab of ice. She didn't look up from the document she was signing. To her right, her father, the general, sat in a leather armchair reading a newspaper. He didn't look up either. To her left stood Marcus, the lawyer, hands clasped behind his back. Haley, Zachary said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. Haley, she finished signing her name with a flourish, capped her pen, and finally raised her eyes. They were cold, clear, and utterly unrecognizable. You are late, she said. We expected you 10 minutes ago. Expected me. Zachary scoffed, trying to regain his footing. He walked further into the room, aiming for the chair opposite her desk. I didn't say you could sit, Haley said. Zachary froze. Mid-step, the command was sharp, absolute. He slowly straightened up. Okay, look, Zachary said, holding his hands up. You've had your fun, you scared me. The repo men, the bank account, the job, congratulations. Haley, You proved you have Daddy's money. Now, act like an adult and call them off. We need to talk about Asher." "We are talking about Asher," Haley said, tapping a folder on her desk. "Specifically, the tuition fund you drained to pay for Jessica's cosmetic surgery." Zachary blanched. "That I was going to pay that back. It was a loan from a 5-year-old. Haley raised an eyebrow. "Zachary, stop lying. It's boring. You don't understand business," Zachary shouted, his temper flaring. "I was building something. DeFaje Ventures was going to be huge. I did it for us. I wanted to be the provider." "You wanted to be the owner," Haley corrected him, her voice deadly calm. "You didn't marry a wife, Zachary. You married an ATM that you could legally bully into cooking your dinner." She stood up then. She walked around the desk. She was wearing heels that made her taller than him. Or maybe he was just shrinking. "For 5 years I played the part," she said softly, circling him. "I wore the cheap clothes. I clipped the coupons. I let you lecture me on how to save 5 cents on milk while you bought $200 scotch. I wanted to see if you could love me, just Haley, not Haley Sterling." She stopped in front of him. "And," Zachary whispered, his throat dry. "And you failed," she said. "You didn't love me. You loved feeling superior to me. You loved having a dumb wife so you could feel smart, and the second you thought you could upgrade to a newer model using my money. You tried to discard me. I still love you, Haley," Zachary stammered. Reaching for her hand, she stepped back as if he were contagious. "Don't," she said. "Save the acting for the jury." Jury. Zachary laughed nervously. "Come on, Haley. We're married. You can't sue me for spending our money." "Actually," Marcus spoke up from the corner, his voice dry and precise, "you weren't spending marital assets. You were forging signatures to access a trust fund that credits your marriage. That is federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." Zachary spun around to look at the lawyer, then back to Haley. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. This wasn't a divorce negotiation. This was an execution. "Haley, please." Zachary's voice dropped to a beg. "I have nothing. I'm homeless. Henderson fired me. Jessica left me. I have nowhere to go." "I know," Haley said. "I arranged it that way. You did this. All of it. I told you," she said, her eyes flashing. "I'm not technologically illiterate, and I'm certainly not helpless." She pressed a button on her desk. The double doors opened behind Zachary. 2 uniformed police officers walked in. Zachary panicked. "No, Haley. Think about Asher. You want his father in jail." "I want his father to be a man regarding his actions," Haley said. "Asher will be fine. He has a grandfather who knows how to raise a man." The general lowered his newspaper. He looked at Zachary with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Goodbye, Mr. Miller." The officers took Zachary by the arms. He struggled weakly. "Haley!" he screamed as they began to drag him out. "I made you! You were nothing without me!" Haley watched him. She didn't blink. She waited until he was at the threshold. "You didn't make me, Zachary," she called out, her voice ringing clear across the room. "You just woke me up." The doors closed, cutting off his shouts. Silence returned to the penthouse. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant city traffic. Haley exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. Her shoulders dropped an inch. The general folded his newspaper and placed it on the side table. He stood up, leaning on his cane, and walked over to his daughter. "That was thorough," he said. "Was it too much?" Haley asked, looking at the closed doors. "He tried to steal your son's future," the general said. "In my day, we would have done worse than prison." Haley walked to the window. She looked down at the streets below. Somewhere down there, a police car was waiting. "What now?" Marcus asked, packing up his files. Haley looked at her reflection in the glass. The dangerous woman was still there, but the anger was fading, replaced by a strange, terrifying freedom. "Now," Haley said, turning back to them with a small, genuine smile, "I believe I promised Asher a trip to the zoo, and after that, I have a company to run." She walked back to her desk, and picked up the phone. "Get me the board of directors," she said into the receiver, "and tell them Haley Sterling is back." 6 months later, the charity gala for the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the kind of event Zachary used to drool over from the pages of Town and Country. He used to tell Haley that one day they would be invited, provided she stopped dressing like a librarian, and he landed the big one. Tonight, Haley was there. She wore a backless emerald gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, a contrast to her old wardrobe of beige cardigans. She moved through the crowd, not with the frantic energy of a social climber, but with the quiet gravity of a planet around which others orbited. "The expansion of the Sterling wing is proceeding ahead of schedule," Marcus said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. He was no longer just her lawyer. He was her chief strategy officer. "Good," Haley said, accepting the glass. "And the rebranding of the acquisition?" Marcus smirked. "The company formerly known as Miller Holdings has been fully absorbed. We liquidated the redundant management. The profitable assets have been merged into Sterling Tech." "And the redundant management?" Haley asked, taking a sip. "Mr. Henderson retired to Florida, and Zachary," Marcus paused, checking his watch. "Well, Zachary is currently fulfilling the terms of his plea bargain." Haley didn't smile, but her eyes softened with a grim satisfaction. She didn't need to ask for details. She knew Zachary had avoided a lengthy prison sentence by pleading guilty to fraud and agreeing to full restitution. But since he had 0 assets, the court had been creative. He was currently serving his 2,000 hours of community service. Specifically, he was picking up trash along the interstate highway, wearing an orange vest that was definitely not tailored. "Does he know I'm here?" Haley asked. "He knows you're everywhere, Haley," Marcus replied. "You're on the cover of Forbes this month." Haley turned her gaze to the ballroom. It was filled with the city's elite people who had ignored her for years, or worse, pitied her as Zachary's dowdy little wife. Now they lined up to shake her hand, desperate for a moment of her time or a fraction of her capital. A waiter approached with a tray of horse duvers. He was young, nervous, and trying hard to balance the silver platter. As he brought the tray down, his eyes locked with Haley's, the color drained from his face. It wasn't Zachary. It was the man from the wine shop Zachary used to frequent, the one who used to laugh at Zachary's jokes about his budget, conscious wife, while upselling him $300 bottles. Haley looked at him. She didn't say a word. She simply selected a tartlet, gave him a polite nod, and turned back to Marcus. "You possess a terrifying amount of grace," Marcus noted. "It's not grace, Marcus. It's indifference," Haley said. "They don't matter anymore." "There is one person who does, however," a deep voice rumbled behind her. Haley turned. The general stood there, looking regal in his tuxedo. Beside him, dressed in a miniature version of the same tuxedo, was Asher. "Mommy," Asher chirped, disregarding all social protocol to hug her legs. Haley crouched down immediately, uncaring that her expensive gown brushed the floor. She wrapped her arms around her son. He smelled like baby shampoo and peppermint. "What are you doing up past your bedtime, little man?" she asked, smoothing his hair. Grandpa said we had to see the Queen, Asher said seriously. Haley looked up at her father. The general's eyes were misty. I didn't say Queen, the general corrected gently. I said the CEO, though the difference is becoming negligible. Haley stood up, holding Asher's hand. She looked at her father, then at Marcus, and finally at her son. For 5 years she had lived in a small, cold house, shrinking herself to fit into a life that was too small, convinced by a small man that she was worthless. Are we going home soon? Asher asked, tugging on her hand. Mrs. Higgins made cookies. Yes, Haley said. We're going home. She looked back at the party one last time. She saw the glitz, the glamour, the noise. It was all fine. It was business. But as she walked toward the exit, flanking her father and holding her son's hand, Haley realized the victory wasn't the money, it wasn't the CEO title, and it certainly wasn't seeing Zachary in an orange vest on the side of the road. The victory was the silence in her head. The voice that used to say, you can't, you shouldn't, you aren't enough was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady rhythm, the sound of her own heels clicking on the marble floor. Click, click. Haley Sterling walked out into the cool night air, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi illuminating her path, and for the first time in her life, she didn't blink. Let's pour a glass of something vintage and discuss the dimmed light syndrome. Haley committed a crime that many intelligent, powerful women are guilty of. She shrank herself to fit into a small man's life. She clipped coupons, she hid her heritage, and she played the role of the struggling partner, all to protect Zachary's fragile ego. She thought if she made herself smaller, he would feel bigger. It never works. If you shrink yourself for a man, he won't rise to the occasion. He will simply get comfortable with your diminished state and then complain that you aren't shining bright enough. Zachary didn't love Haley. He loved the fact that he could control her. The moment she stood at her full height, backed by the Sterling name, and more importantly, her own self-worth, he crumbled. He was structurally incapable of handling a woman who didn't need him to survive. The tragedy isn't that Haley lost 5 years. It's that she spent those years apologizing for her own abundance. So I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever played pauper to make a prince feel secure? Did you hide your intelligence, your money, or your shine just to keep the peace? And when you finally turned the lights back on, did he applaud? Or did he run for the shadows like Zachary? Tell me your story. I'm listening. Madam, read out.